You know, that kind of like icky fuzz you scrub off the shower curtain. Yeah, mold. Most of us have dealt with that.
Right.
But what if that's just the tip of the iceberg? What if there's like this massive hidden mold threat just lurking in buildings and homes all over the world? A threat that's way worse for our health than we think.
That's a really good point, because we often see that fuzzy stuff and just think, oh, gotta clean that up.
Yeah.
But it could indicate way bigger problems, hiding beneath the surface, stuff that could really impact our health and well-being around the globe.
And that's what we're diving into today. It's a deep dive. And today it's all about the global threat of mold. And we've got a ton of info to give you the full picture, all the facts you need about this danger that, honestly, we tend to ignore. So yeah, I'm your host, and I'm here to unpack all of this with you. And I'm super excited to have our expert with us today who can really shed some light on all the complexities of this topic.
Happy to be here.
So our goal today is straightforward, and that's to extract the most important info about mold dangers worldwide, answer the questions that you're probably asking, and reveal some surprising facts that you just absolutely got to know. So let's start with the basics. What exactly is mold, and why is it so good at making itself at home in our homes and like buildings we inhabit?
So mold basically is a type of fungus, and it's kind of like you can think of it as a microscopic cousin to mushrooms.
Okay.
But unlike mushrooms, which grow in the ground, mold forms these colonies on surfaces. And the reason it thrives in our buildings comes down to three key things: moisture, some organic material to feed on, and just the right temperature.
Okay, so like the perfect recipe
Yeah.
for mold.
And unfortunately, our homes and workplaces, they tend to have all three.
Right.
So think a leaky faucet, you get some condensation on a window, even just like the humidity in the air, these can provide all the dampness that mold needs to thrive.
Right. Doesn't need much.
And then the food source, that's our everyday building materials: drywall, wood, dust, even some fabrics. And, we like to keep our homes at a comfortable temperature.
Right.
Mold loves that temperature, too.
Oh, great.
Perfect conditions.
Yeah, not great for us. So you mentioned like different types of mold. We hear about black mold a lot. And people, they freak out a little bit about black mold.
But understandably.
But is there really, are some types of mold truly more dangerous than others? Is there really a hierarchy of danger here?
It's a good question. And the answer is yes and no. So there are tons of different mold species out there, and they don't all have the same potential to cause health problems. Black mold often refers to Stachybotrys chartarum, and it's gotten a bad reputation.
Right. I've heard of that.
Yeah, because it can produce mycotoxins, which are basically toxic chemicals.
Oh, okay.
But here's the important thing. Not all molds make these toxins. And even that black mold, the Stachybotrys, doesn't always produce toxins.
Got it. So it's not always a given.
Exactly. And other really common molds like Aspergillus and Penicillium, they can also cause health problems, especially for those with sensitivities.
So it's not just about one bad guy, it sounds like.
Right. The key takeaway is that any significant mold growth, no matter what color it is, means you've got a moisture problem that needs attention.
So it's a red flag in general. Okay, so shifting gears a little bit to the bigger picture. We're seeing more extreme weather events globally. How does that play into, or how does climate change connect to this increasing mold issue that we're talking about?
It's a huge factor. Think of it this way. Every major storm could be a future mold outbreak waiting to happen inside people's homes.
Wow, that's scary.
And climate change is making these storms worse and more frequent, leading to more flooding and water damage, which of course mold loves. And changes in temperature and humidity patterns are also giving different types of mold a chance to spread to new areas. Even extreme heat can make condensation worse inside buildings.
Right, so it's like a kind of a perfect storm.
Exactly.
Not a good kind.
Unfortunately, yeah. And all of this means we're likely to see even more mold globally, thanks to our changing climate.
So it's a concerning picture for the future. Let's focus on the immediate impact, our health. What are the most noticeable, common symptoms that could signal mold exposure? Like, how do you even know?
The most common symptoms are often mistaken for allergies or a cold.
Oh, okay. Sneeze?
Yeah, so we're talking sneezing, runny nose, stuffy nose, itchy eyes and throat, coughing, skin rashes.
Right.
So you can see how it's easy to miss the mold connection, especially if it's hidden.
And it's not just a minor inconvenience, right?
Yeah.
Living with mold, can it lead to more serious problems down the road?
Definitely. Especially if you're exposed to mold for a long time in a damp indoor environment. It's been linked to chronic respiratory diseases like asthma, bronchitis, and even hypersensitivity pneumonitis, which is a lung inflammation triggered by breathing in stuff you're sensitive to, like mold spores.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And if you already have a respiratory problem, mold can make it much worse.
Yeah, you don't want to mess around with that. So this is where it gets a little more, I think, concerning for a lot of people.
Hmm.
The possible connection between mold and, like, neurological problems or immune system disorders. Is there any evidence of that link?
This is a really complex area, and researchers are still figuring it all out. There are some studies that suggest exposure to certain mycotoxins, those toxins we talked about, could possibly be a factor in neurological symptoms like headaches, memory issues, trouble focusing, things like that. And similar research is looking into how mold exposure might affect the immune system. There's some suggestion that it could maybe trigger or worsen autoimmune responses in people who are susceptible.
Oh, wow.
But it's really important to understand this is a developing area of research. We
Real.
need more research to really understand this connection.
So it's not definitive, but it's something to watch, it sounds like. Are there certain groups of people who are just more at risk, more susceptible to these negative effects from mold?
Yes, there are. Children are especially vulnerable, particularly very young children and infants, because their immune systems are still developing
Okay.
and their airways are smaller. Older adults who may have underlying health conditions are also more at risk. And of course, people with weakened immune systems, whether it's due to HIV/AIDS, organ transplants, chemotherapy, anything like that, they face a greater risk of serious reactions to mold. And anyone with existing respiratory issues like asthma or allergies, they're also more likely to experience a worsening of their symptoms.
So it's not an equal playing field. Let's zoom out to the global perspective again. Which parts of the world are struggling the most with mold, and why is it so prevalent in those areas?
It's not surprising that places with high humidity and frequent flooding are more susceptible to serious mold problems.
Makes sense.
Tropical and subtropical zones often have those conditions, so they become hotspots for mold growth. Think coastal areas, regions with a lot of rain, places prone to hurricanes or monsoons.
Right, right.
And in these areas, it's just constant moisture, so mold can thrive year-round.
Just has a party.
Exactly. And poor building construction or inadequate infrastructure can worsen these problems, especially in lower-income countries.
Things that much harder. So it's a stark contrast then between those humid places and like drier, colder climates.
Hmm.
How does mold growth differ in those environments?
So in tropical climates, you have this constant high humidity, so there's always a source of moisture. And that leads to mold growing quickly and spreading widely on all sorts of surfaces. So
Yeah.
you might see it pretty visibly, and it can spread fast. But in colder regions, even though the humidity is generally lower, you can have issues with condensation, especially during temperature swings.
Okay.
If a building is poorly insulated or doesn't have good heating, moisture can build up on walls and windows.
Right.
So you might not see as much mold overall, but you can get significant growth in those specific damp spots.
So it's more localized.
Exactly.
Okay. And it's not just our homes, right?
Yeah.
What about places like offices and schools where people spend a lot of time?
Any building with moisture problems can get mold. And that definitely includes offices and schools, so things like leaky roofs, plumbing issues, bad ventilation, even condensation from AC units can all create perfect conditions for mold to grow.
Yeah, you don't want that.
Definitely not. And in those environments, it can affect a lot of people at once, leading to those same health problems, and it can even impact productivity and learning.
Yeah, absolutely. So where's mold most likely to be hiding in our homes, those sneaky spots we don't always notice?
The worst spots are often the ones we can't see easily.
Okay, yeah.
So behind walls where there's been a leak, under carpets that got wet and didn't dry properly, in crawl spaces or basements with moisture problems, inside ventilation ducts, even behind wallpaper.
Oh, wow.
Often by the time you see mold, there's a much bigger issue lurking underneath.
So if we can't always see it, can we smell it? Is that musty smell a reliable sign of mold? And what other early warning signs should we be looking out for?
That musty smell is often a really good indicator that you've got mold growing somewhere, even if you can't see it. Okay.
Because mold releases these volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, that have that distinct musty odor. So if you notice that smell and it keeps coming back, you should definitely investigate further.
So trust your nose. What else?
Some other subtle signs could be water stains on walls or ceilings, paint or wallpaper that's peeling or bubbling, wood that's warped or discolored, and of course, any history of leaks or flooding.
Makes sense.
And if you keep having allergy-like symptoms that seem to get worse when you're inside, that could be a sign too.
Oh, interesting. So it's like a whole detective process. What about those DIY mold test kits you can buy? Do they actually work, or is it better to just call a pro if you're suspicious?
Those DIY kits can sometimes tell you if there are mold spores present,
Okay.
but they often can't tell you what kind of mold it is or how bad the problem really is.
Okay.
And it's easy to get a false negative if you don't use the kit correctly.
So it's not foolproof.
Right. So if you think you have a serious mold issue, or if you have health problems that could be related to mold, it's best to call a qualified professional. Makes sense.
They have the expertise and the right equipment to find hidden mold, figure out what kind it is, and really assess the extent of the problem.
So it's worth it for the peace of mind.
Definitely.
Okay, so what can we do to stop mold from even getting a foothold in our homes? What are some effective prevention strategies?
Prevention is key, and the most important thing is controlling moisture. So fix any leaks immediately, make sure there's proper drainage around your foundation, and address anything that's causing dampness,
Right, right.
like, condensation. Using a dehumidifier can also help, especially in places like basements and bathrooms.
You mentioned condensation. Does proper ventilation really make a big difference?
Absolutely. Good airflow is super important for managing indoor moisture.
Okay.
So make sure you're opening windows and doors regularly to let fresh air in. Use exhaust fans in the kitchen and bathroom while you're cooking or showering. And check your HVAC system to make sure it's working properly and bringing in enough fresh air.
So basically, keep things dry and breezy. Makes sense. But what if someone does find what they think is toxic mold in their home? What should they do first?
If you suspect you've got toxic mold, try not to disturb it too much. You don't want to release more spores into the air.
Oh, right, yeah.
The first thing is to find the source of the moisture and fix it. That's crucial. Then, depending on how bad the mold is and where it is, you might be able to clean it up yourself.
Okay.
But that's only if it's a small area. If it's a larger problem, or if you're having health problems that could be related to mold, you really should call a professional mold remediation company.
Makes sense.
They're trained and equipped to handle it safely and effectively.
So DIY for small stuff, pro for the bigger stuff. What about those common household remedies? Bleach and vinegar. Do those actually work to get rid of mold?
Bleach can kill mold on surfaces that are non-porous, like tile or bathtubs.
Right.
But it doesn't work on porous materials like drywall or wood.
Oh, right, yeah.
And it can actually leave moisture behind, which ironically can make mold grow back. Vinegar is a gentler option, and it can be effective against some molds on porous surfaces. But how well it works can vary. For more thorough mold removal, there are specialized antimicrobial cleaners. And again, for serious mold problems, professional remediation is often the best solution.
So it depends on the situation.
Right. But no matter what you use to clean, it's essential to fix that underlying moisture problem so the mold doesn't just come back.
Yeah, you got to deal with the root of the problem. Now let's talk about something a little different, the legal side of things. If you're renting and you have health issues that you think are from mold, what are your rights? Can you take your landlord to court?
It really depends on the laws where you live. But in general, landlords are legally required to provide a safe and livable environment for their tenants. And that includes taking care of things like leaks and mold that can affect your health. So if your landlord doesn't fix these problems after you've told them about it, you might have legal options. You might be able to break your lease without penalty, or you could sue for compensation for medical expenses or property damage caused by the mold.
Interesting.
But it's always best to talk to a lawyer who can give you advice specific to your situation and your location.
So know your rights. And for homeowners, does regular homeowners insurance typically cover mold damage?
Unfortunately, standard policies often have limitations or even exclude mold damage specifically.
Really?
If the mold is caused by something sudden and accidental that is covered, like a burst pipe, then the damage might be covered.
Oh, okay.
But if it's due to ongoing issues like neglected leaks, chronic humidity, or just poor maintenance, it's usually not covered. So homeowners should check their policies carefully and consider getting extra coverage for mold, especially if they live in an area with lots of moisture problems.
Good advice. Are there any countries that have taken this issue seriously and have really strict rules about mold in homes and buildings?
Yeah, some countries are taking the public health risks of mold seriously.
Okay.
Certain European countries, for example, have incorporated moisture control and ventilation standards into their building codes,
Oh, wow.
specifically to prevent mold.
That's great.
And some regions have guidelines and standards for mold assessment and remediation, but how strict these rules are and how well they're enforced can vary a lot from place to place.
So there's room for improvement, it sounds like. If more governments wanted to tackle this mold problem, how could they do it effectively? What are some strategies?
Governments could definitely be more proactive.
Yeah.
For starters, they could develop and enforce stronger building codes that really focus on good moisture control and ventilation. And this would apply to both new construction and renovations.
Okay, that's a good start.
Public awareness campaigns would also be helpful to educate people about the health risks and how to prevent mold growth.
Right, education is key.
Definitely. And investing in more research to understand the different health effects of various mold types and to come up with standardized protocols for assessment and remediation would be huge.
Right.
And finally, providing financial support to low-income households to address existing mold problems could help reduce health inequalities.
That's a really important point.
Yeah, because mold can disproportionately affect people who are already struggling.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Let's bust some myths. Is toxic black mold really a death sentence? Or is that an exaggeration?
That idea that toxic black mold is a guaranteed killer is a myth that's gotten way blown out of proportion.
That's scary though, right?
I understand why people are scared. But while that type of mold, the snacky trees, can produce those strong toxins, not everyone who's exposed to it gets seriously ill.
Okay.
The actual health effects depend on a bunch of factors. How much you're exposed to, how long you're exposed, your individual sensitivity, your overall health. It's complicated.
Right, so it's not a simple equation.
No, it's not. So while that black mold is definitely something to be concerned about, it's not a guaranteed death sentence.
That's reassuring. And is it true that mold only grows in dirty homes?
Not at all.
Really?
While poor maintenance can contribute to moisture problems that lead to mold, mold can grow anywhere if the right conditions are there.
Okay.
I mean, a leaky pipe behind a wall, poor ventilation in a bathroom, even just high humidity can all create a breeding ground for mold, even if your house is spotless.
So it's not a reflection on your cleaning habits.
Right.
Okay, good to know. Looking ahead, what are some emerging concerns about mold that we should keep an eye on? You know, we hear about antibiotic resistance with bacteria. Could that be a problem with mold too?
That's a great question, and the answer is yes. There is a potential threat of antifungal resistant molds developing.
Oh, wow.
Just like bacteria can become resistant to antibiotics, fungi, including some molds, can develop resistance to the drugs we use to treat them.
Right.
And that could make fungal infections, including those caused by mold, a lot harder to treat.
So that's something to watch.
Definitely. This is still being studied, but it's a real concern.
As we wrap up our deep dive, what would you say is the most important thing about mold that most people just don't know?
I think the most important thing is that even small amounts of mold, even hidden mold, can have a big impact on your health.
Okay.
Especially for people who are more vulnerable. People often dismiss a little musty smell or a water stain, not realizing that those seemingly minor things could lead to long-term respiratory problems, allergies, and other health issues.
Right.
So detecting moisture problems early and dealing with them quickly is way more important than most people think.
So it's about being proactive. Well, this has been incredibly insightful.
Glad to hear it.
Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. It's clear that mold is a global health threat that we need to take seriously. For our listeners, the message is clear. Don't ignore those musty odors or any signs of water damage in your home or workplace. Early detection and taking action quickly is crucial. And if you have any doubts at all, talk to a qualified professional.
Couldn't agree more.
And for our listeners, as you go about your day, we want you to consider this. In a world increasingly affected by climate change and more people living in cities, how can we rethink our building practices and public health strategies to deal with this often unseen threat of mold? It's a complex issue with far-reaching implications, and we encourage you to keep learning and exploring this topic.
Thanks for having me.
It's been a pleasure.